Hello and welcome to NewsTeam Boulder. I'm Lars Gesing.
And I'm Tessa Saval. Happy Election Day, everyone.
We are here at the Armory, the home of journalism and mass communication at CU Boulder. Over the next 30 minutes, the two of us will bring you up to speed on everything you need to know about candidates, amendments, and ballot measures.
Because there's still time to vote.
It was actually hard to miss all the vote signs on campus over the last few days. The Get Out the Vote effort is part of a larger strategy to curb a troubling trend. Everywhere you look, you get reminded, go vote. There is a reason why for weeks people have been asking you if you have updated your voter registration. In midterm elections, turnout is generally lower than in presidential elections. But 4 years ago, not even 20% of 18 to 24-year-olds cast their ballots. Alice Arnold says there are lots of reasons why students should vote this year.
It's a very ideologically important election as far as Obamacare, abortion, the big issues.
But why is it that young people don't vote in larger numbers?
Too often campaigns don't talk about issues that matter to young voters. In part that's because young voters don't turn out very much and it becomes kind of a weird feedback loop.
Those who want to vote can do so at the CU Rec Center. Student groups and organizations from across Colorado are trying to get people to vote here at the CU Rec Center up until the very last minute. One group of CU students even found a way how to turn your mobile phone and your favorite dating apps on it into a tool for their Get Out the Vote effort. If you recently spent any time on the dating app Tinder, you might have come across some of these pictures. A nonpartisan group of CU students created them to get their peers to vote. Trying to increase turnout, activists leave no channel unused this year. The polling station at the Rec Center is your hub for every question that you have about voting. We are home to a Senate race that might determine whether or not Republicans will actually gain control of Congress.
Because of this close contest, both Democrats and Republicans brought their big guns to Colorado to try to get more people to vote.
But I am here.
Those names included Jeb Bush and Chris Christine on the Republican side. Democrats invited Michelle Obama as well as Hillary and Bill Clinton, among others. They came to help Colorado Democrats who are in danger of losing a Senate seat and the governor's mansion.
There's a reason that the senators and the governor's opponents are running campaigns based on fear. Fear is the last resort of those who've run out of ideas, run out of hope, run out of gas.
In Colorado, 1 in 3 registered voters don't belong to any one party, but the unaffiliated often decide elections. And both Republicans and Democrats hope to win votes with big names.
They become opinion leaders for voters, these voters who are still trying to make up their mind in the last week before the election.
For example, Jeb Bush embraced Democrats' attacks on the GOP would take the country backward.
I'd rather go back knowing what I know about the future of this country, but we have to get a few things right, a few big things right, and if we do, our children will have more opportunities than what we had.
The DC celebrity stumped for Colorado's candidates, but for some, there was another reason to hit the campaign trail.
The reason when you're seeing a Jeb Bush or a Hillary Clinton or someone like that is because they're also looking ahead to 2016 and trying to see how much sway they might have with voters.
No candidate yet announced if he or she will actually run for president in 2016, but that's where the talk will go soon as this midterm election is over. Months of intense campaigning come to an end, while Democrats and Republicans get to see who gets their money's worth after spending millions of dollars trying to get their candidates elected.
Coming up on our special election show, how voters get their information.
An interview with 2 media analysts from CU after the break.
This isn't where you want to be. Don't use a fake ID.
They said I would be more focused. They said I'd get better grades. It's nothing like they told me. It's not what you expected. Don't abuse prescription drugs.
We've all seen more than enough of them this year. Campaign ads, they're everywhere. But do they actually have an impact on how people vote? NewsTeam Boulder's Allison Levine sits down with advertising professor Kelty Logan and CU News Corp's director Jeff Brown to see how voters get their information.
So I'm sitting here with Kelty Logan and Jeff Brown of the CU Journalism School, and I was hoping to talk to you guys a little bit about voter information and where voters get that information and how accurate and truthful it is. So Kelty, you worked in the corporate world. Could you talk a little bit about the difference between who's obligated to tell the truth and how much they stick to that in the political campaign world?
Sure. I think the first thing we should keep in mind is that we're living in Colorado. So the residents of Colorado are being bombarded by political commercials. At this point, has anyone seen an ad for a product in the last 2 months? What concerns me as a former professional in the advertising field is there are rules when it comes to product advertising. The federal government actually oversees the content, and although you don't hear about lots and lots of prosecution, they have that capability. It can happen. Therefore, as consumers, voters are completely accustomed to being able to look at an ad and feel that they're probably playing by some rules. My concern as an advertiser is that is not at all the case with political ads. With political ads, they are protected as free speech. Therefore, they can say what they want.
And what we're finding is that there is, as Kelty mentioned, a lot of stretching the truth. And while we don't have any sort of meter that says this is a total lie or this is absolutely the truth, we certainly come up with descriptions that describe the claims that these advertisements are making. And what we're finding is that there's a lot of context missing. And I mean, it's kind of the problem in general with 30-second spots or even 60-second spots, is you've got something as complex as defining how we deal with people who happen to kill in utero fetuses or babies, and go beyond just talking points that are pro-life or pro-choice, and to talk about real constitutional issues dealing with what happens to someone who does harm to that being inside the pregnant woman. There's just so much context that's lost. Not so much out and out lying, although we do see some of that. It's mostly just context that misleads people and makes them think somehow that each issue and each race is simply a black and white issue.
How many of the people who are seeing these ads would you say that's their only source of information?
You know, it's interesting because the source of information, as you say, the only source, I mean, people tend to also, what we know about news consumerism is that people are sometimes sort of secondhand consumers.
It has been proven that negative ads, and that's what we're seeing, lots and lots of negative ads, fire up the base, in the words of the politicians. And so what this is a voter turnout effort on the part of both parties. They really are trying to get you very, very upset about something that will motivate you to get to the polls.
So Jeff, as the director of CU News Corp, you yourself actually run a fact-checking service. Can you tell me a little bit about how that works and where you go for accurate information?
Yeah, so initially we went through a training with the American Press Institute that spoke specifically to looking at things that can be checked. But generally we find a specific statement that has some data attached to it to just determine whether that fact is actually, or that statement is indeed a fact.
The election might almost be over, but political ads will make a comeback in 2016 when we elect a new president. What a contentious Personhood Amendment is all about, and what a casino in Arapahoe Park may mean or not mean for Colorado classrooms. This is a special Election Day edition of NewsTeam Boulder. We'll be back after the break.
Good. Get out. Get out.
Like,
That's right.
Get out.
Do I look like a commingled contender to you? All I want is newspaper.
Why don't you bring that bottle over here? I won't be spitting it back at you.
All right, boy, why don't you bring that bottle over here to commingle so these boys will stop bickering and ruin my night.
Coloradans voted down personhood amendments twice in the past. This year, supporters are making a new push. And as our Lars Gesing reports, in the debate over when life begins, they face broad resistance once again.
It's Tuesday night at Emily Morgan's house. She and a few fellow buffs have gathered, not to study, but to call voters across Colorado.
Have you heard of Amendment 67, which is trying to ban abortion in Colorado?
Amendment 67 aims to protect both the mother and the unborn child if a crime terminates a pregnancy. But to Emily, the real agenda behind Amendment 67 is to outlaw birth control and abortions.
I would not be able to take some of the medications I take now. They would be criminalized, and it would also put me at risk for a pregnancy that I can't support right now.
But even if Amendment 67 gets approved, federal laws will still prevail.
This is a state law constitutional amendment, and state law is always subordinate to federal law, and particularly to federal constitutional law.
That federal law is the 1973 landmark case Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court ruled that, without the mother's health at risk, states cannot regulate the abortion until the final stage of a pregnancy. Professor Nagel said Amendment 67 would only criminalize harm done to a pregnant woman and her unborn child by a third party, not by her doctor or herself. For decades, courts across the country have upheld Roe v. Wade. The case was controversial 40 years ago, and it is still controversial today. Roe v. Wade is what's really behind the Amendment 67 debate this year.
Personhood USA and Personhood Colorado have the intention of banning abortion in all cases. They've been very clear about that, and they have also stated their intention to use this measure, if it were to pass in Colorado, to challenge the tenets of Roe v. Wade.
This year's Personhood Amendment has a new face, Heather Surovic, who lost her unborn child Brady after a drunk driver crashed into her car 2 years ago. The Colorado state legislature reacted and passed a law that criminalized the unlawful and reckless termination of a pregnancy. But the bill did not grant personhood to unborn children.
It still does not address the issue of the criminal action to the full extent of the law. We want that criminal prosecuted. We need a fetal homicide charge.
Amendment 67 opponents fear such legislation could pave the way to reverse Roe v. Wade. That would open the door to outlaw abortion as well as common forms of birth control, which prevents the fertilized egg from implanting in the uterine wall.
This would be a huge overarching bill that would have huge negative impacts on women especially.
Scared of that outcome, these students will keep swapping text for phone books from now until Election Day.
Latest poll numbers indicate a majority of Coloradans opposes Amendment 67. You've probably seen the TV ads about Amendment 68. That claims that gambling revenue from Arapahoe Park casinos will now go towards Colorado school funding. NewsTeam Boulder's Lel Snellgrove reports that this amendment isn't the only way communities are trying to get more funding for schools.
Ballot Issue 3A is the second multi-million-dollar bond that Boulder Valley School District has proposed in the last decade. If approved, the bond will provide $5.7 million for various facility repairs and construction. The district's debt increase will cost homeowners an extra $188 a year in taxes for homes valued at $400,000. According to CEO of Impact on Education, Fran Ryan, public school funding is sought through local bonds and tax revenue because the state of Colorado won't foot the bill.
That is the only vehicle available to a school board to repair their facilities or create new facilities.
Assistant Principal Amanda Holden of Angevine Middle School agrees that without a bond, the money is unlikely to show up otherwise.
That's why in Boulder Valley we pursue something like the Facilities Management Plan.
Amendment 68 on this year's ballot has a similar idea. Use tax revenue from gambling in Arapahoe Park to fund Colorado schools.
I am philosophically opposed to using education as an entity to market or sell.
Colorado ranks 43rd in the nation for K-12 education funding. If ballot issue 3A passes, it will be the largest capital construction bond of its kind in Colorado history. Reporting for CU News, I'm Lo Snellgrove.
Last year, Coloradans voted down an amendment that would have increased school funding with $1 billion tax increase. When we return, we look at new propositions on this year's ballot and a local measure that would increase lighting on the Hill.
Colorado voters will decide whether genetically modified food in stores here on the Hill and across Colorado needs to be labeled. NewsTeam's Danny Freed found out that those labels might not always tell us what exactly we need to know.
Would you like to try some honey?
On any given weekend, Boulder's Farmers Market offers a variety of produce. Most of this produce is organic, meaning it was not genetically engineered or modified, a technique that transfers genetic characteristics from one organism to another.
Food and Water Watch believes we have a basic and fundamental right to know what's in our food.
The organizer for Food and Water Watch, Lisa Trope, wants to ensure that food and water remains safe in Colorado.
There are no long-term studies on the health or environmental impacts of genetically engineered food.
Representing the Farmers Alliance for Integrated Resources, Jane Udy says that Proposition 105 will do the opposite of what is intended.
Labeling has to meet certain criteria of being accurate, reliable, and consistent. And the farmers have no problem with that. They do this all the time with their foods. And when they also falsely require farmers to label some of their foods as having GE ingredients, when after processing there is no GE protein at all.
Many of the foods that we consume today, whether it's tomatoes, corn, or even sometimes some parts from carrots, contain some sort of genetic modification. But regardless of the facts from both sides, Colorado consumers won't always be swayed by what they hear.
Being able to understand the science behind what genetically modified means is a level of communication and understanding that is very difficult to educate the American people on.
Genetic modification by itself is not abnormal, it's not unnatural, it goes on as through the normal course of things. And I think the challenge here is we're labeling anything that has changed as a genetically modified organism, particularly if it's, and the definition here is how that change got into the organism. It's not the change itself, which is really perhaps what we should be more worried about.
Many people believe that labels are a good thing. However, labeling is not protecting consumers from something that isn't safe because the evidence says otherwise. Danny Freed, NewsTeam Boulder.
Genetically engineered food became a commercial product in the 1990s. Since then, it has been studied intensively in more than 1,700 safety studies and reports done by the National Research Council and even the World Health Organization. Boulder was once labeled the Athens of the West. Now, the city is known for its fast-paced thinking and risk-taking culture. But some of its cultural institutions have seen better days than these. NewsTeam's Jenna Chatillon tells us how voting this year could change that trend.
It's charming. Some might call it adorable. In the University Hill neighborhood, the Boulder History Museum looks like any other home. Inside, over 45,000 artifacts donated by local families over the last 60 years. But now it's become too small. Like other cultural institutions in Boulder, it's insufficient.
We do a great job with our open space and with our recreational facilities in town. But unlike many of the communities up and down the Front Range, Boulder has not done a very good job of supporting community in the arts. And this is an opportunity for Boulder to correct that.
That opportunity is in Ballot 2A, a proposition in the upcoming election that's a temporary 3-year sales tax increase that will generate nearly $28 million. Money that will go toward giving the city a new look, new additions to the civic area, fixing up Boulder Creek Path, and renovating the Dairy Center for the Arts. Boulder's largest multidisciplinary arts center, the Dairy is a 42,000 square foot facility that houses artists of all genres. Renovations include enlarging theaters and lobby, creating a new entryway, building more conference rooms, all adding up to an improved facility that hopes to enhance people's artistic experience of Boulder.
The arts play such an important part in a community's culture, in the life of a community, and in the economic vitality of a community.
Supporters of 2A see the tax raise as having a modest impact on wallets.
If Ballot 2A passes, Boulder's sales tax will increase from 3.5% to 3.8%. On a median family household income, that's an impact of about $53 a year. The tax amount equates to 3 cents on every $10 purchase.
2A is also expected to improve safety, in particular adding more lighting on the hill.
Going out on the hill at night, especially my friends that are girls, and I know that's definitely a lot safer and it's good.
If passed, taxes will be higher compared to surrounding cities, but still not the highest. In the meantime, Boulder History Museum is morphing into the Museum of Boulder. Plans are underway to uproot themselves from their historic home and to downtown Boulder's Masonic Lodge, which will have 4 times the space and a broader canvas for Boulder's artistic vision. Jenna Chatillon, NewsTeam Boulder.
There is little opposition to the ballot measure. However, city officials believe that if 2A doesn't pass, it will be several years before the improvements can be made. Next up on our NewsTeam Boulder election night preview, our interview with Professor David Brown, the chair of the Political Science Department. He explains why this year's Regents race might actually shake up the board.
I'm a good student.
We don't want to
Why
be
are you
at your
guys
party
busting
any
me?
more than you want us here.
What could we have done to avoid this?
Keep the noise down so no one complains.
Hey, guys, keep it down. The neighbors are complaining.
Make sure anyone drinking alcohol is at least 21.
You sure you're old enough?
And finally, make sure that you don't have too many people.
Man, that would have been easy. I wish I had known the rules. Now you know. Avoid trouble. Know the rules.
We want to see our children succeed. But setting easy goals for our kids creates the toughest obstacle they'll ever face. Because succeeding in the real world isn't easy. Help the effort to raise standards in America's public schools. Call 1-800-96-PROMISE.
Colorado's Board of Regents could flip Democratic for the first time in more than 3 decades this year.
NewsTeam Boulder's Brittany Baker sits down with a CU political scientist to ask him what this would mean.
Hello, I'm Brittany Baker with NewsTeam Boulder. Today I'm sitting with Professor David Brown, who's the Department Chair of Political Science. We'll kind of be talking a little bit about the CU Regents race happening and get you a little educated on what's going on. So, David, can you tell me a little bit about the CU Regents race this year, why it's such a big deal, especially when possibility of it flipping Democratic?
Well, there's a number of different issues that are important for CU as a whole. And so who sits on the board is going to be very important over the next 5-6 years.
Yeah, so if both candidates, let's say Democratic and Republican, both have the same views on tuition and diversity, why is there a big deal on voting one or the other?
I think the Regents the body is a little bit different. So once someone becomes a regent, whether it's from the Democratic side or the Republican side, I think that there is, what I've seen in the past is that candidates, when they get voted as regents, they come in and they realize and they learn about what's happening in the CU system. And so the sense that I get is that once you become a sitting member on the board, there's more of a sense of camaraderie and actually working to get things done. And so what I've seen is that the regents sort of, they reach across partisan lines and actually get some of those things done. And they're going to have to keep doing that given the challenges that CU faces in the future.
Cindy Carlisle, I don't know if you know her or not, but I guess she's a Democrat and a past regent. She says that partisan politics plays a big role in the Board of Regents, and there's a possibility of, if we do flip Democratic, then there would be a possibility of, getting a new president to go along with their side. Do you see that happening at all? Or
again, I don't want to discount, being a political scientist, I don't want to discount the importance of party. But so let's say, for example, that it goes Democrat, right? So then let's say down the line there might be a search for the CU president. My experience is that there would be an external search, there would be a lot of different candidates that would be contacted, or you might contract for a particular firm to make calls and try to put a pool together. But the pool that gets put together is really what's going to determine who's going to be the next CU president.
And then one more quick question. The Board of Regents hasn't been Democratic since 1979. Why, quickly, is this a big deal if it does flip Democratic?
Yeah, well, there's again, some issues that seem to be, where you can look at and see what is going to happen with respect to the university and whether or not it's more Republican or Democrat. And again, I would just say that, you're still going to have probably, both parties represented on the board anyway. But the things that matter are what you should look at for the students out there is statements about, is CU underfunded? Okay, what's the plan in terms of making sure that CU gets the kinds of resources that it needs from the state or from other sources? So that's one thing to pay attention to, because there's a difference of opinion about whether or not that's really a problem. The other thing is that, okay, how do we make CU remain accessible to students from the state of Colorado? And so there's a number of interesting ways in which you can do that, that I see that's where the candidates are very different from each other.
Awesome. Thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Again, this was Dr. Brown, the Department Chair of Political Science here at CU Boulder, and I'm Brittany Baker. Back to you.
Thank you, Brittany.
The Regents say they don't care too much about politics. What they say is they'd rather make sure that tax dollars are being used effectively and that every student in this state gets a good education.
Well, Lars, the countdown begins. Nearly 6.5 hours until the deadline to vote.
We're going to find out soon about all the races, all the amendments, the propositions, and the local ballot measures.
Starting tonight at 7 p.m., we'll bring you live election coverage as the returns come in. But that's it for us for now, but only for now. I'm Tessa Saval.
And I'm Lars Gesing. Thanks for watching NewsTeam Boulder, and see you guys tonight.